Okay. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Sarah Velasquez. I am the Communications Core Manager. Most of you have probably seen me if you've participated in this video conference before, or have heard of me because I sometimes send emails out to everybody. So if you don't know me, then you will probably hear from me in the future. If you need anything related to communications, to collaboration, any of that stuff, I have access to the full network, so I can certainly help you get whatever you need.
You hold it down. You don't click it.
Sherry, will you mute yourself?
Sorry, I was.
So also please know that we do have Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, so you should check all those out. We have more videos of presentations like the one that's happening today on our YouTube channel and on our website, so please visit all of those. And I'm going to hand it over to Alex and let her introduce herself and her topic and get started.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited for this opportunity, and Sarah, thanks for the invite. I'll go ahead and share my PowerPoint here. Whoops, wrong screen. Okay, can everyone see that okay? All right, awesome. So first of all, I'd like to encourage you to, ask any questions, interact however you'd like to as I go through this. I am the Director of Talent Development and STEM Education at BioKansas. And so my background is actually in research. I got my PhD recently in evolutionary biology from the University of Kansas in Lawrence. And I think I saw Rob Ward there on the phone. So hi, Rob. So basically, as I was going through graduate school, I became really passionate about how to give scientists, and especially early career scientists, the resources and toolkits that they needed to be ready for a wide variety of different career paths. So that's kind of what led me to my role today, and interacting with students is kind of one of the, and faculty, since we have a lot of faculty on, is a lot of the one of the most rewarding things that I get to do in my job. Okay, sorry. So I don't know how many of you have heard of BioKansas, but we are a nonprofit that functions in the life science here in Kansas. And basically, we get to interface with education, government, and industry to help grow the life science ecosystem in Kansas. So to clarify that a little bit more, so with education, events like this, we work a lot with students and faculty. We help support research and give out research awards. Companies is actually one of the major groups that we work with. So you can almost think of us as a trade organization for life science companies in the region. And then we also get to interface quite a bit with government because we go and help educate legislators about the importance of life science in the community and kind of the impact that it has on the economy. So the basic outline of this talk is going to be pretty simple. I'm going to go through, what is biotechnology. We'll kind of go through the drug development process because I feel like that really helps get a better sense of what types of roles are out there. And then also just speak to what are those opportunities that are available to you here to explore and kind of get your feet wet if you're interested in exploring, other career paths outside of academia. And then as far as how do we pursue a biotech career, I'll kind of walk you through how to figure out what it is that you might like, and then how do you get access to opportunities. Okay, so the first question is, what is biotechnology? And it seems pretty obvious when you look at the two words. So it's basically technology that uses biology. And generally, we speak about biotechnology in that these are products that kind of help improve our lives. And there can be different ways that this functions in. So one of the primary ways is to help feed the world. So there's a lot of biotechnology around, how do we make more sustainable aquaculture, for example. So there's like genetic engineering going on, and fish and shrimp. Of course, a lot of gene editing associated with food. And then there's also just general kind of animal health to help make or sustain different sources of food. Fuel is another big one. So there's a lot of biotechnology around biofuels. So this is a way to kind of help heal the world and have an impact on the environment. And then the really big one is kind of healing both in terms of human and animal health. So the majority of biotechnology we think about tends to be, more around pharmaceutical companies and animal health companies, and we'll speak a lot to that as well. So do you guys have any questions at this point? Probably not. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so one thing a lot of people don't realize is that we actually have an extremely robust life science industry here in Kansas. There are almost 15,000 employees. There are several hundred establishments. And then the average wage is pretty high. So I wouldn't get too attached to the number here, since I think it averages over a lot of different degree backgrounds. But for example, for those of you who are undergraduates in the audience, the entry level salary for something around biotechnology is going to easily be in kind of the $40,000, maybe low $50,000 range, and that's without that advanced degree. So there's in this kind of sector, the wage is almost double than any other, the average wage in Kansas overall. And so some of the sectors that we have here in the area, human pharmaceuticals, human health companies, that also goes for animals and animal health, and I'll get into that a little bit more later. There are also things known as contract research organizations, and these are groups that will kind of do different parts of the kind of drug development or biotechnology process. I'll speak to that a little bit. There's also a lot of diagnostics and testing labs, and then we also have a lot of opportunities in biomanufacturing in this region. Okay, so an overview of the drug development process, and like I said, I'll kind of overlay all of these parts with what opportunities are available in each area. So first, it seems pretty obvious, but you start with an unmet health need. So there has to be some problem that you're trying to solve, and there also usually needs to be a market for that to be solved. So I'll just give you an example of something here locally. There's a startup called Singulate Therapeutics, and they have actually developed a capsule that will deliver a timed release of ADHD medication. So it releases in 3 different doses over a period of, I think, 12 to 18 hours. And basically the unmet health need there is that a lot of ADHD medications for, that children take will, either release all of the drug at once or maybe only a couple of times, and that leads to a lot of crashes and so tired kids. So this isn't, this isn't necessarily curing cancer, but it is something that, affects a lot of people, and it is a problem that someone is trying to address. So that's just one example. Of course, there's anything around different types of diseases, cancers, in both humans and animals. So yeah, the premise there is that you have that unmet health need. And then a really big piece of this is kind of the research and development. So how does that translate? This is all very similar to what you're already exposed to, kind of in academic research. But basically, companies will look to discover potential drug targets. So this can be studying disease pathways, discover potential compounds or biologics that might bind or modify whatever targets that they have found. And these are all things that, you also see in the academic research space, and there is actually a lot of overlap in this part of the pipeline. So a lot of times professors will, at these kind of first couple of stages, if they find a potential compound, that has the potential to be a therapy or a cure for a disease, then they might spin off and kind of start their own company. So a lot of this research kind of overlaps, and then industry will also use just the broad base of publicly available research and research that's been done by universities as a foundation for any of these studies that they might be doing. And so once you have some kind of potential products that have, whatever properties it is you're looking for, then you have to kind of refine and validate that activity for safety and effectiveness. And so a lot of times, maybe you've made this drug, but then you have to figure out, how is it absorbed? Does it affect metabolism? Is it toxic? So all of these kind of refine and validation studies. And so what are the different roles that are available for these areas? So again, these are things that you're going to be pretty familiar with already. Laboratory techs, analysts. In industry, there are different kind of levels of scientists that are based on experience. There are also principal investigators at companies. There are project managers. So this is just a sampling. It's not a comprehensive overview of the titles or roles. And then usually the background and education for roles like this include, certainly life sciences, but also, just broader STEM fields. And then again, the different degree levels. So even at a bachelor's level, you have a lot of opportunities to work in industry. And those are kind of those laboratory tech analyst roles and kind of those assistant scientist positions. And then as you receive graduate degrees and kind of other types of advanced education, then that's going to open you up to kind of those more senior roles in research. Any questions here so far? Okay. All right, so the next kind of process of this, you found some potential substance, you've kind of tested it in animals, and then the next really big step here is clinical trials. So first, once you have that drug or compound, you want to test it in healthy patients first to validate safety. So this is known as kind of the phase 1 clinical trials, and it's usually a pretty small group. And then you'll move on to phase 2, where you actually test in disease patients. And this question is, does this do what we say it does? Does it affect? Does it help, treat a disease? And then this kind of takes a larger group of folks. And then phase 3, this is where you have to make the case that whatever it is that, you've discovered and developed, is it better than what's already currently out there on the market? And so for this, you need a really large population of patients, and you need to kind of compare your results to other standard products that might be used. And this takes a really large population of patients. So as you can guess, dealing with all of these, for those of you who have done research in the lab, you know how much error is associated and how much variation happens with any experiment you do. And of course, if you're trying to test things in humans who have had, immensely different environmental backgrounds and genetic backgrounds, there's a lot of variation. So for these types of roles, there's a large need for, of course, data analysts, statisticians, because you have to make a case that, you can confidently say that this has worked, significantly better than a comparable treatment. It is efficacious, so you have to make a really strong case, and you do that with statistics. Also, just managing these trials, they can be very lengthy. There's a lot of logistics involved. So there are a lot of clinical trial coordinator positions. And then, of course, research scientists, people who run the projects in a more administrative role, medical doctors, nurses. Those are all other kinds of titles and roles that you might see in this field. And so again, super wide range of backgrounds. Certainly life science is a big one here. So biologists, people who work with data, know how to code, and then have some sort of statistical background. And so you can, for the kind of clinical trial coordinators, you can do those kinds of jobs with kind of lower degrees. And then again, just very similar, depending on how advanced your degree is, it kind of determines your level in administration for these types of activities and what kinds of research you would be doing. Okay, so the next part of this, so even after you've done all of these clinical trials, you still have to get things approved by the government. And so in human health, that's the FDA, and then in animal health, that's the USDA. So there's a lot of roles that revolve directly around this regulatory piece. And so the activities here are, you have this new product, you've done the clinical trials, and you're trying to pave the way for approval at these agencies. If you already have an established product, so say you're already manufacturing Tylenol or something, you still have to have ongoing efforts to make sure that every single batch is what you say it is, that everything is up to quality, sterile, compliant. So you also need a large group of people that are kind of functioning in maintaining the quality of a product. And then on the government side, there's a lot of opportunities in, the people who are reviewing these proposals for, to approve different therapies and drugs. And then, of course, just policy around how do we set new guidelines? How do we adapt to the changing biotechnology landscape? So an example here, if you, for things like Apple Watches, I don't know if some of you have seen that recently the FDA approved these kind of types of technologies to be counted as medical devices. And so basically, there's been a lot of commotion in the government trying to figure out, to have products on the market that are going to make assertions about people's health. That's something that, should the FDA be involved or not? And so they've actually had to change a lot of their rules to adapt to kind of this new landscape of new technology that also can affect health and possibly diagnose different diseases. And so potential titles and roles here, regulatory affairs specialists. If you're at a startup and you're trying to get to that first stage, commercialization officers, chief development officers, those are going to be pretty high exec roles. So those would come with a lot of experience and advanced degrees. Those government roles can be kind of a mix of PhD, MD. I think with the experience, you could also do it possibly from a bachelor's level. And then quality assurance specialist and quality control. That's kind of more in this middle section of if you already have an established product. And those roles you can get access to pretty easily with just a bachelor's level degree, or sometimes even high school if you have the relevant experience. Okay, so another really big next step is biomanufacturing. So if you think about it, for those of you who have done research in a lab, everything you're doing is pretty small scale, right? So you're doing things kind of on a test tube level. So one of the really big challenges is, say your treatment works and there's a huge demand for it. How is it that you can make large amounts of this product in a really kind of consistent way? So that's a big, an extraordinary challenge a lot of times in this biotech industry. It's one of the reasons that a lot of these really great ideas and startup companies will fail, actually, is because you might have a really great product, but if you don't have a way to make it in large quantities fairly quickly, you're not going to necessarily, keep up or be effective as a company. So manufacturing is a really big area and a really important part of this area. So for these types of roles, you actually have a really high need for people with engineering backgrounds, so process engineers. You need a lot of these engineers to help you figure out how to scale up, these reactions that you're doing or the experiments you're doing. And then, of course, engineers to just help you build the equipment, which is often extremely specialized and very expensive. So I had mentioned earlier that company that made that really innovative capsule to have timed release, to release drugs over, I think it was 3 different time points. And so they were actually saying that to make, that specialized machine that made that capsule in that specific way, that machine costs millions of dollars. So this manufacturing part is also incredibly expensive, and that can be kind of another barrier in this process. But again here, so engineers, biologists, you're going to have roles that are, they might be titled manufacturing technicians, product technicians. Those you can get into usually with kind of high school or bachelor's level. The engineers usually bachelor's level as well, same with chemists, biologists. And then in these manufacturing roles, this is actually where you get the majority of those quality assurance and quality control pieces. So quality assurance is more kind of about the paperwork and what is the process to manufacture things consistently, whereas quality control is actually testing the product and making sure that at all stages you're producing what you think you're producing. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time about this, but this is another kind of really big part of this process, and that's the supply chain. So first of all, if you are trying to make really large batches of drugs or whatever product it is, how do you get large amounts of kind of those reactants to you to produce the drug in a timely manner? So you've got to look at all of those, possibly obscure ingredients that you might need for a special treatment, and then figure out how do we get all these things to come together in a way that, we can meet the needs of the market, for example. And then that also goes for how do we distribute our product around the country. So another place that people with STEM backgrounds can actually engage with industry is through marketing and sales. So the question here is, how do you get your target audience to buy and use your product? Because this process that we've walked through here is actually extraordinarily expensive. So it can cost millions, hundreds of millions, and sometimes billions of dollars to get a drug all the way through this process, which is completely insane. And, it's also very rare to get something to market. So for example, I think it's 1 out of maybe 10,000 candidate drugs make it to market. So basically the point here is that you've spent a ton of money trying to make a drug or a therapy, and you have to make sure that you're able to make that money back, and otherwise you can't support other research endeavors that you might want to take on for other disease, to cure other diseases. So the marketing piece of this is, obviously running marketing campaigns, developing marketing materials. So those pharmaceutical ads you see on TV where people are walking on the beach, that's kind of in this space. And then another really big part of this is going out on the front lines to meet with doctors and scientists to sell and troubleshoot the product. So for those of you in research labs, you've probably often seen somebody stop by your lab who comes in to check your pipettes or talk to your PI. So those are often kind of the field representatives. So they usually have a science background. Some have pretty high level science backgrounds, actually. PhDs will often have these kinds of roles as well. And basically, you know, they know the process, they know the challenges, and they know the product really well. So they're kind of the representative who knows everything about this product. And so the titles and roles you might see here are people who are, you know, in marketing, marketing managers, director of marketing, pharmaceutical representatives, medical liaisons. So again, these are people that will either try to convince doctors to buy certain drugs or therapies, or, you know, they interact maybe with patients or patient groups. And then again, kind of those field representatives and field techs. And for this area, having that STEM background is actually incredibly helpful. And marketing and sales sales especially, is actually a place that scientists can make a lot of money if you're into that kind of thing. Okay, so one really, really cool thing that a lot of people don't realize is that this entire process can actually happen in Kansas. And what I mean by that is we have everything we need to take a drug to market. So from the research side to people who will do all of these different components. And, you know, kind of do these components individually, which is that contract research organization part of this. So if we kind of think back to that initial overview of what are all of these regional companies doing. So for example, some companies actually will take on this entire process. That's usually pretty rare. The way this usually gets split up is that you'll have a startup, or you'll have, you know, a researcher at a university who's kind of doing this initial part of testing and development. And then this part might get bought out by a really big company that's good at doing the rest of this process. So this basically gets sliced up into a lot of different areas. And then some companies regionally will just specialize in only one of these things. So for example, we have several groups that will do just the clinical trials part of this, or they'll actually do kind of toxicity studies and validation of, you know, of getting you that data to say, yes, this drug is effective and it's safe. And that outside perspective will help you kind of convince those government regulatory bodies that, you know, that you have the data to support this being a potentially effective drug. Yeah. You guys have any questions here? Okay. So how many people have heard of the animal health corridor? In Kansas to Columbia, Missouri, we have the majority of the world's animal health companies. And basically, if you think, well, what is an animal health company? They basically do all of these same things, but with the goal of treating animals. And so, for example, we actually have a lot of companies that are doing really cool things with curing or with treating cancer in dogs, diabetes in dogs. If you guys have heard of Merck Animal Health, they actually develop drugs and treatments for just about any animal-related thing you can think of. So for chickens, they develop vaccines to ensure that farmers don't, you know, lose an entire flock of chickens. They have a lot of vaccines and treatments for cattle, pigs, horses, and then a lot of these animal health companies will specialize in companion animals. So these are, you know, dogs and cats. And so a lot of the flea and tick and heartworm treatments you see are actually, the research is done here locally and they're manufactured locally even. So next time you go to the vet, you know, I encourage you to be a super nerd and kind of look at your label and see if you if it's a local company that is making that product. And this process is really similar for animal health, just like human health, except of course you're not doing the human trials for the animals. And one thing, that I didn't really think about, which is kind of silly, but since I have an evolutionary background, I'm so used to thinking about, how do we apply what we know about model organisms, to human health, obviously, that I don't realize a lot of these animal health companies, whenever they're working on things that are pretty rare in animals, will actually look to human health and try to extrapolate that back to treatments in animals. So you can kind of go both directions. Okay, so some other things that maybe aren't directly in kind of that pipeline we walked through include medical devices. So these traditionally are, companies that might develop or manufacture, different types of implants, whatever, kind of physical technology you can think of that might be used to treat or diagnose a disease. And as I mentioned before, digital health, so things like apps, smartwatches, monitors, all of those kinds of things are now being classified as medical devices as well. And so another really cool example of something here locally is a product called FitBark. So it's like a Fitbit for your pet. And the idea here is that you can monitor your pet's activity while you're at work throughout the day. And that might not seem very significant, but the premise here is that you'll be able to know if, your dog is maybe scratching more than normal, or maybe it's got a limp, or it's not moving around as much as it should be. And so that can be really useful data for vets to use in eventually, treating whatever it is that your pet might come down with. Another really cool area for people with science backgrounds is intellectual property. So basically, to help know whether a technology can be really innovative, you have to usually have a scientific background whenever you're dealing with scientific products. So that can be a really cool and rewarding field that a lot of people don't think about. And then science policy is kind of one that is getting a lot more attention over the last few years. So basically there are a lot of jobs kind of in the DC area more so than here, but where you can kind of advocate for science, or you try to use science to help influence policy. And so again, that's another role where scientists can engage. Okay, so one thing to think about is that whether you're an undergraduate student or a graduate student, your next career step is coming up pretty quickly. So it can be really hard to figure out your career path. And, there's still a lot of people that I meet who say, who might be in their 30s and 40s, pretty cool high-level roles, but they'll say, well, I still don't really know what I want to do. So I will say it's perfectly okay to not know what direction you want to go yet. But, how do you figure out where, how do you even start, I guess? So a really important part of this is you have to have a basic awareness of what's out there. So, for example, this seminar is a really good example of that. So now you kind of have a little bit more of an awareness of what opportunities are, at least here locally, kind of in the more industry and business side of science. But the really, really important thing that you have to do is experience things to figure out what you like. So even if you went and just read through every possible job title and description, you're still not really going to know if, regulatory might be a field you're interested in. You might think, well, it sounds pretty interesting, but until you have some experience, you're not going to know what you like. And I'd say even more importantly, you're not going to know what you don't like. So I've actually heard quite a few people say that even after many years of exploring different things, the value is that, they know a lot more about what they don't like than what they do like. And I do think there's some value in that. So the ultimate best way to get experience, hands down, is internships. This really gets you into the environment that you might work in if you decide to go into industry. And it's extremely valuable in getting a job in industry. I will say, and I remember being really frustrated by this as well, but kind of that experience paradox where, you need experience to get experience. That problem doesn't really go away even whenever you get, an undergraduate degree in the sciences, or even a graduate degree in the sciences sometimes. So for companies to know that, you truly are interested and aware of what it is they're doing, they really like to see that you've been in a similar environment before. So I, very strongly encourage you to try and take advantage of an internship if possible. And then another really big one is job shadowing. And this isn't as much on the experience side, but it's a really great way to get you kind of seeing, again, what it is that you might and might not like without the long-term commitment of an internship. So for example, if some of those things we discussed really piqued your interest and you're like, well, I'd really love to see what it looks like on a manufacturing floor where they're making, hundreds of gallons of vaccines for chickens, there are paths to where you might be able to shadow somebody for, a day, or even just go in for a couple hours and get a tour that could really help you get a better sense of what is it that these people are actually doing day to day, and would I like to do that? One thing I highly recommend is informational interviews. So for those of you who haven't heard of this before, it's basically where you find someone who you think is potentially doing something cool, whether you meet them somewhere or kind of stumble upon them by LinkedIn or somebody introduces you. You just ask if they would have time to meet for a quick coffee, because you'd love to learn more about their career path or maybe what their job role entails. And almost, I would say 90 to even 100% of the time, people will happily agree to meet with you, especially if you're a student and you convey that you're still trying to figure out what career paths are out there. So I highly recommend doing that. That's also a really fantastic way to naturally build your network. So you might meet someone for coffee and they'll tell you about what it is that they do, and they might mention another role, and you might say, oh, well, that sounds really interesting too. Do you know somebody who does that? And oftentimes they're more than happy to introduce you to a handful of other people that do something similar or something you might be interested in. Networking is huge, and I'll talk a little bit about this to the next slide. And then one thing I would really encourage is to, if you think this is an area that you're interested in, be persistent. And so what I mean by that, I'm not advocating that you be like annoying or harass people, but basically, don't be afraid to ask as many questions as you need to figure out what you want to know and whether something might be a good fit for you or not. And a really big one here is create your own opportunities. So I know a lot of students who are looking for internships get really frustrated when they don't see any posted, or there's only maybe a few openings in the region. So one thing that most of the people I know who have been successful have done is they found a way to create their own opportunity. So basically what this means is if you really want an internship or some sort of experience at one of these organizations, you can be persistent and meet people and just be vocal about what it is you're looking for, and communicate that you would really love to get this experience and why, and do your research, and that can kind of lead to a lot of custom opportunities that aren't necessarily things that have been advertised. Okay, so one thing, one exploration tool you can use is our Career Center. So one thing that can be really frustrating is trying to figure out what kinds of jobs are you qualified for, right? So I went through a lot of job titles already, so those are helpful, but we wanted to kind of create a place where all of the STEM-related jobs in our area were posted, and so that's what we're trying to do with our Career Center. So you can use it just as a career exploration tool. So you can use it to look at different titles, start seeing, are there certain skills that keep coming up over and over again that maybe you think you don't have yet? So that can be a really great way to realize, oh, well, how do I maybe strengthen this skill? Because it's clearly in demand, in this thing that I want to do. And then, of course, you can also use it to start applying for opportunities. And that's something, if you are thinking of taking your next career step fairly soon, I would encourage that you start applying for things now, because it will take a while to kind of get the feel of how do you submit an effective resume, how do you interview. So it's never too early to kind of start. And again, an interview can lead to a lot of those custom-made opportunities. So you might not get the job, but you might, you might make a really great professional connection, or that might lead to a part-time position or an internship at some point. Okay, so networking, I feel like I cannot stress this enough. So the majority of opportunities, I would say, outside of kind of tenure track academia, arise through networking. And so in this region, I've seen people try and put numbers on this, like around 70 to 80% of jobs are filled through networking. And just kind of through my own anecdotal polling of everyone I know in this field, that certainly seems to be the case. So, networking, getting to know people who are, either in these fields that you're interested in, is a really good way to find out about opportunities, to find out about what the needs are, and to be more informed about the industry and the community in general. And so those networking opportunities will oftentimes, again, lead to those, lead to internships, custom opportunities. That's another way that you can really engineer your own opportunities. And so some examples, I just threw up a few events that we're co-hosting. And one of the things, if you decide to go to these events, I will be at all of them. So if you're really nervous about networking with people you don't know, you already know someone there. So you can just come say hi to me and I can help introduce you to folks. So one upcoming event is the Medical Device Network meeting. So again, that was kind of in that space of people oftentimes in engineering or bioengineering who are making, possibly implants, but then now it's also expanding to all of that digital health and technology. One Health Day on November 1st is happening at K-State Olathe, and that's something that BioKansas and BioNexus KC are also co-hosting. So that's a great place to learn a lot about different types of research going on in the area, and network with industry. And then there's also a poster competition here as well. So I highly recommend, one of the biggest skill gaps that we get told about is communication, being an effective communicator. So the more ways that you can practice conveying your research to people who aren't necessarily in your field is a really fantastic way to get that experience. So I would highly encourage you to take advantage of any poster research talk opportunities that are kind of to broader and more diverse audiences. And then we've just got a member reception on November 8th. So this is a pretty low-key fun event. We'll have a KINBRE museum, and basically it's just straight networking. So food and drinks and meeting a lot of industry members, and then kind of same with that bio break. Okay, so I think the last thing I'll kind of mention, and then I'll open it up for questions. So all of the examples I've given you here today are things happening locally, but there are a few really kind of standout companies in this initial premise that I told you about. So one that I really enjoy telling people about is Prometheus Genetics. So basically, they're a small startup that is looking to help solve the world's food crisis. So they're genetically modifying shrimp to where they need kind of less of a geographical footprint to farm shrimp. So I think that's really cool. ICM is down in Wichita and also in St. Joe. So they do a lot of work around biofuel, but then they're also looking for ways that they can use, like say the shucks from the corn to maybe feed or sustain, other fish. So they're looking at multiple ways that they can have an environmental impact. And then Ventria Bioscience is a company out in Junction City, and they use rice to kind of mass produce proteins that they then supply to kind of third world countries where people have a lot of gastrointestinal problems. And they also have some grants from the Gates Foundation. So there's a ton of examples similar to these that are also happening in the area. So if you're, you obviously got into science, either because you love discovery or you want to help people in some way. And there are a lot of opportunities to kind of directly impact our community and kind of the world through biotechnology. So I encourage you to, if you are looking for more networking events, you can sign up for a newsletter where we'll actually just send out weekly events emails that just have any kind of STEM related networking that's going on around the state. So that can be a good way to get your feet wet into networking. Okay, so that's all I have, but if you guys have any questions, I would love to talk more. So thank you. Yeah, I was muted. I was like, I don't know if anyone's clapping.
I might start one with a question if you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, this is Ryan Spalding at KU Medical Center. I'm just wondering if you, in the Career Center, also have information about how to get those shadowing or internship experiences, if you have companies listed that offer those, and if they have contact information. We're always trying to figure out how to kind of close that gap between our students and getting into some of those experiences. And Doug, you may want, I think Doug is working on some of that as well, but that's a big gap for us.
Yeah, and so we certainly want the Career Center to be a place where, there are tons of internship opportunities. We do post them whenever we get them. The issue is that there really is just a limited number of companies that offer internships and, will widely advertise internships. So that's one of the gaps that we're also trying to work with, trying to fill as well, is how do we get more of those smaller and mid-sized companies that are really, there's a lot of fantastic opportunities there for students, but it is difficult for them to offer internship opportunities, possibly because they don't have the managerial capacity or the money to support those kinds of experiences. So, one thing that I can think of that could be a little bit more immediate and impactful is maybe developing relationships with certain companies that might be open to doing some sort of job shadowing or tour where you could get a lot of students in at once to kind of see, to experience a certain environment.
So this is Doug Wright. I'll just kind of weigh in. I do think that's important. And one of the things that I think that there's some information that we really don't know about what are the needs. Is it really simply just a cultural thing with the smaller companies that just haven't really thought through how to develop an internship program, or they don't have the resources and management of that, or they need to have cost sharing from other entities? And that may be something that we, I think we in BioKansas can begin to explore, because once we identify key components of that, then the K-INBRE can kind of help. And the reason I say this is because I know that other INBRE programs across the nation are attacking this problem. The University of Idaho has a really good internship program, exactly kind of as you're sort of speaking, and that's kind of what they had to do, is go find out what the problems were, how the INBRE program could solve those problems, and then also cost share some of that. So I think that's something that we should be interested in exploring. I agree with Ryan, it's a huge gap.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, just anecdotally, because I do ask our companies when I get a chance about that internship piece, and it's a mix of all of those things, but it would be nice to have some numbers behind that. And then I also know that some states will offer those internship matches, and there's also pretty innovative kind of co-op opportunities where companies can band together to offer opportunities. So yeah, I definitely think this is a space we should be engaging with, as much as possible to help fill.
I have a couple other points that I just I think, Alex, fantastic. It was very informative. I do both basic and clinical research, and so the diverse nature of the degrees that we have working for me in my own research, whether it's be animal research or clinical research, is pretty amazing. And I agree that being educated about all the different possibilities within those realms is really important, because we hire a lot of different people, and they come from very diverse backgrounds. So there's a lot of opportunities. I really enjoyed your point about creating your own opportunities. I don't think there's any place to be passive about this. I think that students, if you're interested in this, be aggressive, attend the networking opportunities, talk to people. Don't sit back and wait. Those jobs are just, sometimes they fall in your lap, but rarely do they. You have to go out and create your own opportunities, and I think that's really an excellent point that Alex made. I would just add, Alex, that make sure that the Kansas INBRE is helping you advertising all your networking opportunities that are coming up. Please work with Sarah to make sure that we post that in all of our forums to help spread that word. I think we can become a better active partner with that.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions?
One last question before we wrap up. I was curious, one of the students was asking about how many companies participate in the BioKansas network. Does she have any kind of numbers she might be able to throw out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have about 170 members, and maybe, around 60 of those are kind of those core kind of research companies. And then there are also a lot of support industries, kind of those law firms that will do the intellectual property and kind of all of the other services that the core science companies might need. And then educational institutions are another kind of big group of our member network.
Is your membership public? Is it on a website, or can they write you if they have a particular interest maybe and you could help them with a connection?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do a lot of, connecting is a big part of what we do. So if you just email us, if there's a, specific need that you're looking for, we're happy to connect people.
Thank you.
I would just say that all of the students should go and check the BioKansas Career Opportunity website. I've been sort of searching for jobs throughout the seminar. It's always a dangerous thing, but it's really a great website, very informative. It's amazing the different types of jobs. And also I see that you have positions listed from the universities as well. And I had not thought of posting our own job opportunities with you guys, but I think that's probably something that we should consider.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're out of time, so I appreciate everybody coming today. And Alex, I appreciate your presentation. It was great. And like I said, this has been recorded, so I'll post it on our YouTube for anybody to look at again, or if anybody wasn't able to attend and they heard about it and want to see. And I guess that's it. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Sarah. Thank you, Alex.
I got it unmuted.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.